Greetings from LA. This is Daisuke, and I'd like very much to continue on with our with my reactions to the favorite films lists that were very kindly provided to me from Patreon users and supporters and Patreon friends. So I mentioned it before, but let me say once again that it was my great honor to receive some favorite films lists from Patreon friends, and so I'd like to take the opportunity to respond in video format to the lists that I have received. Again, I want to thank my dear friends Patreon at Patreon for your continued support of this channel. So thank you very much for that. You know, all proceeds go towards Blu-ray purchases or the like. And I might actually I might need to upgrade my audio equipment in terms of recording and stuff. That will probably that will go towards helping me out with some of that as well. So thank you so much for your continued support of the channel and the like, and also above all else, thank you for your continued enthusiasm for this great thing which we all love, which is cinema. You know, this is wonderful sustenance. To my Patreon friends, thank you so much. And so, as a kind of gesture to show my appreciation, let me please take the lists that I have received very generously from that people have very generously sent to me. I'd like to respond to these one at a time. And so that brings us to the next list that I received, which is from our dear friend Tanner. Tanner and the Horrible Show. So Tanner has been a dear friend to all of us. Wonderful, wonderful person. So enthusiastic. I've been talking on this channel as well, among other things, about Halloween films, about Nightmare on Elm Street films. I'm try to get him back, to figure out another theme that we can talk about together, as well as, of course, his great channel, The Horrible Show. So please check out The Horrible Show, the YouTube channel, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and go to all his videos and thumbs up all of his videos and notification bell and everything, all that, because he deserves that. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. So nice. And so Tanner, you very kindly provided to me a list here, and let me see here. It says I'll do top 10. Wonderful. Dawn of the Dead, 78, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Aliens, The Exorcist, The Shining, Inglorious Basterds, Apocalypse Now, Terminator 2, Day of the Dead, Hot Fuzz. Oh, very nice. Very nice. And you mentioned here, not the most under-the-radar films, but man, I love them so much. Thank you, brother. First of all, thank you, my dear friend. Thank you so much. And this is a great list. You know, this is your favorites list. So, yes, of course, be proud of this. This is a wonderful list. Absolutely wonderful. Oh gosh, yes. Oh, absolutely fantastic. So, where should I begin? Hot Fuzz, yes, yes. Murder, murder, murder. Yeah, or how should I do this without? I'll try to do this in the vaguest way so as to not to spoil it for those who have not yet seen this great film. But this really hurts. So okay, do you get that reference? I'm sorry. I'm sure maybe you do, but again, it's great choice. And then Day of the Dead. I'm assuming, right? This is right. This is the George Romero film from '85, and you very kindly sent to me as a gift the Day of the Dead making of book, which is really wonderful gesture. Thank you so much. Gosh, I think did I mention this? There's a very famous line from Day of the Dead where a character, one of the main characters in this film, who's named Rhodes, says a line at a key moment. Again, I'll try to be as vague as possible for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this great film from George Romero called Day of the Dead. But there's a line that this key character called Rhodes says, Captain Rhodes. He says this, and he says, choke on him. And he says this, and so, but he says it, there's a kind of inflection in his voice when he says this line. And I remember when I was a kid, watching this on VHS, because it was something that you could rent from a video store back in the day. And it was indeed a film that I was able to watch when I was living in the United Kingdom. They had Day of the Dead available in the United Kingdom, but at the time, when I was living in the UK around the late 80s, early 90s, they didn't have Dawn of the Dead. So I was so fascinated with Dawn of the Dead because I couldn't see it, but the one that I could see was Day of the Dead, and and so it became this like fascinate. It started my fascination with all things Dead films and Romero, or one of the things anyway. But that was my first foray, or one of my first entry points into the Dead films. And then so Day of the Dead, watching Day of the Dead on a VHS rental, and watching this scene involving this character called Rhodes saying this line, "Choke on him." But as we know, the VHS tapes didn't have. It's not like we have Blu-rays and DVDs today where you can press a button and you can have optional subtitles come up and you can get what it is they're saying. We didn't have that with VHS tapes, so you just without or sans subtitles that were printed or showing up on the bottom of the screen there. So right, because if I don't know what someone is saying, or it's maybe difficult to hear or something, maybe I'll press the subtitle button on a Blu-ray today, and so I'll be able to catch what it is they're saying, assuming that the subtitle is correct, of course. But in the VHS days, we didn't have that luxury, so I couldn't quite note. I was always trying to, what is he saying? So when I was a kid growing up, I had no idea what he was saying, because it didn't sound, it wasn't so clear. I think because of certain circumstances of the scene, if you recall, it wasn't the most opportune time for someone like Rhodes to say it, the words choke on them in the most clear and easy to listen way. I mean, there's a lot of stress perhaps placed upon him at that time. So understandably, maybe the words that he would say would be somewhat difficult to hear. So it sounded to me like choke on. Like, it was very difficult to understand. So for the longest time of my life, one of the great cinema mysteries for me was, what does Rhodes say at that moment? And it was only later, maybe with the advent of DVD with subtitle options, I forget exactly, but there was a point a little bit later when I finally discovered what it was he was saying. There's some point, maybe you've had this in your life as well. When you grow up with things and you're so used to them, but you're not sure what it is they're saying at a given moment. But then later on in life, when you watch it again, or maybe you have hindsight, or maybe you have some life experience which might help to explain certain things, provide context, etc. But when you're a kid, sometimes there are moments in dialogue that you don't quite get, for whatever reason. So that was one example for me. But I did find out what he said a little bit later. So, and then when I found out what he said, it made sense. Absolutely made sense. But I'm sorry. Again, I'm rambling. I apologize. So Terminator 2 is next. So Terminator 2, why goodness. Terminator 2 and Apocalypse Now. Wow. I wonder do you have a preference as to what version of Apocalypse Now you maybe gravitate towards, or does it maybe just as a concept? Because as we know, there are, I think, many different versions that are made available. And that's true, I think, for many films here. I mean, I think that could be said for a work like even Terminator 2, which you also have, or also The Exorcist, which you also have here, and Aliens as well. So, and Dawn of the Dead, the other Romero film, which many different versions. So I wonder maybe how that changes the conversation for you, if at all, when we're talking about great films like this, like Apocalypse Now here. So it was a great choice. The Inglorious Basterds, this is the Tarantino film. I saw this, I didn't see it upon initial release, but I saw it a little bit later. I am so fascinated by Tarantino's use of language. And of course, I'm not the only one, and this is not a novel concept that I'm making. Of course, I think this is a point that has been made by many critics who have lauded the works of Tarantino from the very start of his career as a director, in terms of the dialogue, how witty and sparkling his dialogue is, how catchy it is. And I remember, it's not Inglorious Basterds, but it was an earlier Tarantino film called Pulp Fiction. I remember watching, I think I mentioned this on YouTube somewhere, I remember watching Siskel and Ebert, their review show, and when they reviewed Pulp Fiction, they loved the film so much, they were giddy. It was wonderful to see how happy they were talking about a film they really loved. And they were talking about one scene there where the character in Pulp Fiction, portrayed by the actor Samuel L. Jackson, says the word which is correctamundo. And I remember, was it Siskel or I forget, was it Gene Siskel or Roger Ebert? One of them, maybe both of them. They were just glowing in their praise about who. We're watching a film and it includes the word correctamundo. We've never seen this before. This is amazing. So that's a great example of maybe where Tarantino's strengths really shined from the get-go in terms of language. And to me, Tarantino has always been one of those where he exemplifies this notion of in many ways the pen is mightier than the sword, because in many ways the dialogue is more dangerous than the violence, the physical violence that is also part of a lot of the milieu of the stories that he tells in the films that he's directing. So, and he's writing as well. So, in many ways, his works to me exemplify the pen is mightier than. So take a film like Kill Bill. There's a lot of swordplay in Kill Bill and a lot of action sequences and fights between protagonist and antagonist. But a lot of the sequences, especially I think in Kill Bill. The second part, especially in that film, I would say that a lot of the jousting occurs in terms of dialogue, and so I always found that to be very much in terms of pen is mightier than the sword type of. Not to say that the sword is any way weaker or less effectual in the hands of Tarantino, but I'm just borrowing the phrase. But in any event, yes, language is very important, and so. Why am I saying this? Inglorious Basterds to me is one of the great encapsulations of language. Not just because of the traits that I think, which I mentioned earlier, that I think are very prominent in the film Inglorious Basterds in terms of the verbal jousting, in terms of the manipulation, and it's all down to the words and word structure. It's not just word structure. There's also gestures. There's also collisions and manipulations and deceit and lies, etc. But there's also one-upsmanship and the like. But it's also portrayed through dialogue, and it's also portrayed through dialogue in a way that is very pointed. There are tones that are reflected based on dialects within language, different languages. In terms of the European language context and how that plays into the film Inglorious Basterds as well, and turns into a lot of really fascinating plot points, as you know. Language is so great in that film. And then, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. And then you have here The Shining, The Exorcist, Aliens, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, and Dawn of the Dead from 1978. So we spoke about Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 before, right, Tanner? When we were speaking about Nightmare on Elm Street films. So this is awesome. Yes. Gosh, I wonder, you've got to tell me one of these days what your favorite quotes from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 are. Maybe we shared this during our conversation, but maybe some of Kincaid's dialogue. Here's something I'll share with you. So I remember after I saw Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 as a kid. Maybe I didn't mention this when we were talking about Nightmare on films last time, but when I saw Nightmare 3 for the first time as a kid on VHS, in the 80s, it was a huge, huge deal. And so I just absorbed everything I saw. And even now, every once in a while, when I think about lullabies to sing to go to sleep, I always think about the bit where Kincaid is in the quiet room towards the latter half of the film, the second half of the film, and he's like crouching in the corner there, trying to resist the urge to sleep, and he sings that. And the camera closes in very slowly, and what does he do? He sings like a little lullaby to himself. He's ain't gonna dream no more, no more, ain't gonna dream no more. All night long I'll sing this song, ain't gonna dream no more. So I always sang that to myself, not always, but I occasionally sang that to myself, and I even now kind of sing that to myself whenever I think about just lullabies. Somehow or another, the notion of a lullaby, a nighttime lullaby, one of the things I automatically associate that with in my head is the song that Kincaid sings to himself in Nightmare 3, or Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. It's weird how you have little details like that still latch on to you, even years and years after the fact. I feel that way about Kincaid's lullaby. I also feel that way, it's not on your list, but for whatever reason, even now, I still find myself humming the theme song to the film, which is called The Howling Five. There's a film called The Howling Five, and it has a great theme. And for whatever reason, I have no idea, but even now I hum it. I hum it out loud. And it's now 2024, and I'm living here in an area of LA County, and I'm here with my wife and my kids. And even now, sometimes when I'm in the kitchen, I'm humming the theme song to Howling Five, such that my kids know the theme song to Howling Five. Sometimes they'll hum it along with me. They haven't seen Howling, at least I don't think so. They haven't seen Howling 5, but they know the theme song to Howling 5 because I'm still hum the theme to Howling 5. So I don't know why that happens. It's a great theme, by the way. As well as Kincaid's lullaby here. Okay, I'm so sorry. And The Exorcist that we've spoken about a little bit in passing. So I saw this. Well, let me explain. I saw The Exorcist 2, Exorcist 2, The Heretic first. And then I saw The Exorcist, and the reason was because I was growing up in the United Kingdom for a time in my childhood, and for the longest time, The Exorcist was not available to watch on a VHS tape or something. But I could get Exorcist 2, and then a little bit later, I could watch Exorcist 3. So I was so fascinated with Exorcist 2, at least the cut that I saw on VHS tape, which had the montage of shots, mostly from The Exorcist. And then there's a one shot, I think, at the end of that photo montage at the beginning of Exorcist 2 with Father Lamont, played by Richard Burton. But most of the photos in that montage are are showing the clips or photos or shots from The Exorcist. And it was also the version which is a little bit shorter. It's a shorter version of Exorcist 2. I don't know if you know Exorcist 2: The Heretic, but it's a little bit shorter version. So it has the opening credits as the one with the more upbeat tempo version of the one of the themes, the Ennio Morricone theme in Exorcist II: The Heretic. But in any event, the reason why I mention that is because that was the only Exorcist film I could see on VHS tape at the time growing up, Exorcist II: The Heretic, and that version had shots from The Exorcist. And so I would always be so fascinated with the first, say, 15, 20 seconds of that because I could see actual shots from this film, The Exorcist, which to me was a kind of forbidden film because I couldn't find it anywhere. It was only later when I think my family, my parents, we moved back from the UK to the United States for a certain reason. And I think upon that occasion, I was able to watch The Exorcist, I think, on VHS tape, and it was one of those things with the Warner Brothers soft clamshell type of VHS things. If you remember, I think it was green in color, with that kind of dot matrix thing going on as there as well. I felt like it was like a huge discovery. It was this thing that I was so much aching for and yearning to watch all my life, and I was able to watch it at last, The Exorcist on VHS tape on occasion. I was still kind of a kid growing up, so it was a huge deal, an absolutely huge deal. I think it's affected me more now growing up because now I see the horror in terms of, when I was a kid, it felt very scary in certain parts, right? But now, in terms of the unknown, I'm in my 40s and I have kids of my own, and so I have concern about my kids. I'm worried about them, of course, in terms of how I feel as the parent, as the parent to my children, right? And so that element, I think, becomes more prominent to me when I watch The Exorcist, because that is a very key part of that, which is the relationship between Chris MacNeil and Regan MacNeil. And how that essentially is being devoured before our very eyes as the film progresses, which is one of the scary parts of it, I think. So that's wonderful. And The Shining, I had a discussion with another friend of mine on this channel, Danny Smith. We were talking about The Shining, and he was talking to me about the little details of this. I've seen this film so many times, and I would say, and I've mentioned this before, I wouldn't call it for me like super, super scary per se, but it's quite hypnotic. And so, and maybe I think that's because I've just seen it so many times. I think that could probably be part of it, but I don't think that is meant to diminish my my outlook on the film, because it's quite an extraordinary work. And there are moments that do disturb me. Don't get me wrong, but And then let's see. Okay, then Aliens and Dawn of the Dead. So let me see here. So Aliens. So this is another film that I just. It was in '86, I think. Right, '86. I hope I got that right. And then, so Aliens has always been in the ether in my sort of cinema consciousness, and so I know Aliens very much. Um, and so I mean we've talked about this before. I mean there are the oft right quoted quotes I think for a very great reason. Game over, man, game over. They mostly come out at night, mostly right. Or the one I like, didn't like the cornbread either, right? So, or the one that I was fascinated by Aliens as a kid growing up is of course the alien stuff and Gorman and right Drake. I love the line that Hicks says. Drake, we are leaving. I always loved his inflection of that line. But anyway, what was that? The one that the I mean, there's so many scenes. So many scenes. Again, I've seen this film so many times, I've lost count. But the one between Vasquez and Gorman, towards the latter half of the film there. And again, I tried to be as vague as possible for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this great film, Aliens. But the music, the great music, da na 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 na, and then Gorman and Vasquez are in a kind of situation here, and they're holding something. So it's like dun 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 dun. Blah, blah. Okay, so that's one of the scenes I love how they're like just piling on the hands on the fists there. It's like, what's that, like patty cakes? I think that game is, and it's not really patty cakes. I know it's something else quite different from patty cakes, that scene. But anyway, if I were in that situation, maybe I'd do the same thing. I'd be like, who can squeeze the fists tighter? Is it Gorman or is it Vasquez? Is it Gorman or is it going to be Vasquez? That kind of thing. But anyway, it's a very stressful situation. But what was it? What was I saying? Aliens. Yeah. So the other thing. I'm so sorry. The other thing too about Aliens is, what I was gonna say something, but then I forgot. I totally forgot. I was so overcome with my excitement for Gorman and Vasquez. But anyway, maybe it'll come back to me. It'll come back. It's a great film. Aliens. Yes. A really, really great film. Anyway. Oh yes, yes, of course. The other scene that was fascinating to me was, yes, it was Lance Henriksen and the knife. That was always very I was fascinated by that. I was so scared that when I saw that for the first time as a kid, that was one of those scenes where I was just going like this because I was so scared that something would happen. But oh well, it's. Great stuff. I didn't even mention the alien effects and the like. Well, I guess I mentioned a little bit, but that's so great. And then of course Dawn of the Dead. What could be said about Dawn of the Dead that hasn't been said before? I mean, I don't know. I think it's all been said. It's all on record. Made by comments made by people much smarter and much more knowledgeable about this film than I will ever hope to be. But I'm a huge fan, and I know you are. So I'm so glad to see Dawn of the Dead here. I guess maybe I can end, and I'm so sorry I'm rambling, my dear friend Tanner. I hope you can forgive me, but I guess I can end by saying, I think, I am mortal. I know I will die. I will leave this earth, shuffle off this mortal coil. As I know I must one day. My life is not infinite but finite. So I will leave this earth one day. I hope it is later down the line rather than sooner. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. I hope all is well. You can't tell what the future will hold, but hopefully I will live to a ripe old age. But when I do leave this world, one of my hopes is maybe if there is a funeral service on my behalf, or on the occasion of my passing, it is one of my wishes that one of the songs that will be played at my funeral service is the gonk. I want the gonk to be played at my funeral service. So, and that's in tribute to the great George Romero. And indeed, I've mentioned it before, but again, I'll say it again. Uh, I am a huge fan of George Romero. His films have brought me so much joy and happiness and thrills and chills and scares. And for me, perhaps the epitome of that could be Dawn of the Dead. There have been so many films other than Dawn of the Dead. Day of the Dead comes to mind. Night of the Living Dead comes to mind. Dawn of the Dead, in many ways, for me, kind of sealed the deal. And so I think perhaps it is maybe my almost inability to express in words oftentimes just how much I love Dawn of the Dead. That I wear these glasses, right? I found these glasses somewhere in a shop when I was in Japan, on an online shop many, many years ago. And I said to myself, those glasses look really cool. They look like the ones that George Romero wore, especially later on in his life and when he would give interviews and stuff. I can't, and they also look like the ones that Robert De Niro wore in Casino. But I said to myself, I will never be as cool as George Romero looked when he wore these glasses. I will never be that level. I can't. It's impossible for me. But I'll wear these, and I call them my George Romeros because they remind me of the glasses that George Romero used to wear as kind of tribute to the artist that gave me so many thrills and chills as a kid, as epitomized perhaps most astute or most concretely, perhaps for me anyway, as embodied and epitomized most directly in the film Dawn of the Dead. And so it's that feeling that I have makes me so happy, and so I wear these glasses as a kind of reminder to myself just how much fun and scares I had with films like that. So yeah, Dawn of the Dead is a great film. So well done, Tanner. Well done, Tanner. I'm very happy with this. I'm very, very happy, and I'm so sorry. I just go on and on. I apologize. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Tanner. I hope you can forgive me. But wonderful job, Tanner. Wonderful.